Welcome, everyone. My name is Franz Hartmann. I'm with the Municipal Leaders for Stronger Communities. We are a network of community leaders who want to provide a space for municipal leaders to access experts, knowledge, and resources to help build stronger communities. First, let me begin with the land acknowledgement. I acknowledge that the land I am on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto, where I am, is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. These are lands that were meant to be shared with nature and in a way that honors the life that we have been given. The history of this land clearly demonstrates that we have not lived up to this intention or promise. To have hope for future generations, to have a sustainable world for them, we must recognize the value in each other, reconcile for past tragedies, and ensure compassionate care and concern for all. Further, we must recognize that the various components of our ecosystem, the air, land, water, flora, and fauna, are all interdependent and need to work in harmony. The only way forward is together. Well, welcome to our second webinar, Municipal Best Practices for Protecting Farmland and Natural Heritage. You can view our first webinar at the EcoSpark YouTube website. It's in the chat function. I'm going to ask Ian just to drop that into the chat function now. I want to thank EcoSpark for partnering with us. And I want to first start with a quick overview of what to expect. We're starting with a panel discussion followed by a Q&A, which will likely take us to about 5 p.m. or so. Before we start with the panel discussion, let's spend a moment finding out a bit about who is on this call. So let me hand things over to Ian Borsick, the Acting Executive Director of Environment Hamilton, to walk us through one very simple Zoom poll.
Thanks, Franz. So I've just launched the poll for everyone who's in the Zoom right now. We have almost 75 participants, so we'll just wait until we get to close to 100% filling out. And I'm seeing the results pour in. I thank you all for filling this out quickly. We're almost at that, 90% threshold, which would be good to get most of the folks who are on the call. Getting there really close, and I'll end the poll maybe after this last person joins from the waiting room. Alrighty, I'm going to be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much. And then I'm sharing the results with everyone. And there we go. Back to you, Franz.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Now I would like to turn things over to Margaret Proffitt, our panel moderator. Margaret is the Executive Director of the Simcoe County Greenbelt Coalition and is a respected community leader who understands the importance of connecting and working with municipal leaders in Simcoe County to build strong communities. Margaret. You're on mute, Margaret.
Rookie mistake, right? Rookie mistake. I was going to say, for those that saw me on the last webinar, I guess I did a good enough job to be asked to come back again. We also run the Community Leaders for Sustainable Simcoe and are happy to be a part of this project in relation with EcoSpark and Municipal Leaders for Strong Communities. We have a really great panel today, and 2 of them I know really well. Phil, I'm just starting to get to know, so highly respected people, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of information about them so that you can understand how amazing they are as much as I already do. First, we have Ann Bell. Hi, Ann. She has over 30 years experience working as an environmental educator, researcher, and advocate. Since 2007, she has overseen Ontario Nature's conservation policy and education programs, with a current focus on advancing opportunities to meet Canada's target of protecting 30% of our lands and waters by 2030. Thank you for being here, Anne. Because we're talking about farmland today, we had to obviously have someone who is a farmer who understands this sort of thing, and that's where we come to Phil Mount. He was born and raised on a dairy farm in Ottawa. He pursued an interdisciplinary education that included silviculture, graphic design, farming, political economy, and web marketing. Phil supports food systems transformation and policy change as Associate Director of Just Food in Ottawa. He is on the board of Sustain Ontario and on the executive of the National Farmers Union Local. Welcome, Phil, and thank you for being here. And last but certainly not least is Susan Robertson. Susan is a registered professional planner in Ontario and a member of the Canadian Institute of Planners with 18 years of experience in watershed planning, community engagement, and Indigenous relations. Susan lives in Treaty 19 and is a proud member of the Moccasin Identifier team, which aims to take steps together and cover Canada in moccasins for a better future together. Well, welcome. Hopefully we'll have a relaxed conversation for me. I don't have to answer the questions, so it'll definitely be relaxed for me. It'll be the three of you on the hot seat. Let's start off with just an easy question so that everybody gets to know you a little bit better. Today we're talking about protecting natural heritage and farmland. So what is it that drives you about this topic that drives you to want to see farmland better protected and natural heritage better protected and supported? We'll start with you, Anne, since I introduced you first, then we'll go to Phil and to Susan.
Thanks so much, Margaret. I'm going to focus my answer on the natural heritage piece, if that's okay, because I know we have Phil here and he's way more qualified than I am to talk about the farming piece. But, you know, the question demands a personal response. And to be quite honest, I am involved in this because I love nature and I feel a deep responsibility to do my best to stand up for it and raise my voice on behalf of my non-human kin as well as my human kin. I'm also a parent and I have two wonderful daughters, and I'm very concerned about what the future holds for them. I'd like to make sure that, you know, my generation passes on a safe and healthy world that is just as rich in biodiversity as the one that I grew up in. And that will definitely be a challenge. I think as a parent, I really do have concerns and again, a deep sense of responsibility for future generations. And third, you know, I mean, if we don't do a better job of protecting nature, we as a society are in deep trouble. The evidence is there, it's inescapable. There have been studies that, you know, if it's the economic piece that people really care about, there have been lots of studies about the economic benefits provided by the natural world. One study that was commissioned by the government of Ontario found that a conservative estimate of the benefits of nature, annual benefits of nature in Southern Ontario alone, were over $65 billion. That's our forests and our wetlands and what they provide to society. So if you think about that, it's not something that we can afford to squander. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. And what about you, Phil? You have an interdisciplinary background. What is it about that drives you about farmland protection?
Yes, indeed, interdisciplinary background. And as your introduction mentioned, a long time on the farm, being born and raised on the farm. I've seen huge changes over my lifetime, not only in this region, but over a decade in Southern Ontario, living in UK and Vancouver, and doing research in Ireland, and more recently interacting with other researchers from across Canada and around the world on farmland preservation. Just struck by, in my lifetime, the tiny advances, you know, that we see in, for example, finding ways to incentivize farmers to protect natural systems and how they interact with the farm, usually monetary incentives. Typically very short-term programs, very sort of short horizon thinking, and almost immediately then overwhelmed by backlash, by increasing development and an agenda that prioritizes growth and development in a manner that devalues farmland as farmland. And so just being faced with that throughout my lifetime is one of the reasons that drives me to be involved in this enterprise.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. And I'm at the age now where I go, remember when that was a farm field? I've hit that, you know, you can go through the decades, but now I'm at that age where I'm like, oh, remember when that was something different and it wasn't a strip mall that's now abandoned. Anyways, Susan, what is it that drives you about this topic?
Yeah, thanks, Margaret. I mean, I think I really echo both Anne and Phil's comments. And it is a personal question. I mean, we're of the generation, I grew up with David Suzuki and The Nature of Things on TV, and I saw so much of his activism frontline. And I think as part of my generation, I was born in 77, I'm dating myself. But you know, seeing the changes in the awakening of the environmental movement in that time period was a driving force in my life. But I think more, in particular, more lately, it's about being an ally and a good treaty partner. And that's really what drives me in our relationship to land and to each other, and trying to find almost in my search in my journey really through the environmental planning and watershed planning, finding a cultural ethic that we can embed in law, or that we can look to in law to serve as a means to protect and conserve. And guess what? That's Aboriginal, constitutionally protected Aboriginal rights. Well, it's not my culture, being a Scottish and Irish settler. It's certainly something that I seek to uphold as a treaty partner, because it's really treaties that gave us the right to live here in the first place. They're the legal tool that are living tools, living law that we need to work towards achieving. And I think also it's the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement that really motivates me. We're so lucky to live within the Great Lakes region. It's really the envy of the world. And I'm particularly concerned about our Great Lakes systems. So I think that's also what really motivates me for both natural heritage and agriculture.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, and for that perspective. And coming from the Simcoe County region, you know, the Great Lakes region is wonderful, but we happen to have the world's longest freshwater beach in Lake Simcoe, and you know, we're in the middle of all of this. So I appreciate that perspective, Susan. So as we kind of we're going to start to delve into this, and hopefully by the end of it, the attendees will have an idea of what municipal councilors and councils can do on this topic. But for those that, you know, there's probably some on this that just know it's important, but they may not know what are some of the concerns that really should be driving this conversation about why we should be protecting these things, other than it's just the right thing to do. So I want, if you can keep it somewhat tight, what particular concerns do you have about how farmland is being protected or not, or how natural heritage systems are being protected or not? What are some specific concerns that you have? And Phil, I'll start with you for this one, if you don't mind.
Sure. I mean, I had plenty of concerns before the last 6 months happened. And my concerns have been multiplying very rapidly, exponentially, you could even say. I'd say, I mean, at a time when the average Ontario farmer is at or past retirement age, we need to find solutions to the problem of farmland affordability. I think that's one of the primary concerns I have. I mean, we have like an on-farm crunch that's led to this over-reliance on large-scale commodity production, maximizing every inch of farmland and consolidating land holdings. And that has meant we have ever consolidating and pushing out, basically excluding access to farmland for the next generation. So we need legislation to prevent farmland grabbing and speculation in order to keep farmland in the hands of farmers. And instead, we're seeing something that I didn't really expect to see in my lifetime: a government actively and openly rolling back farmland protection measures, carving up and selling off the greenbelt, tearing up official plans, expanding urban boundaries to include large parcels of prime agricultural land that we assumed were protected as agricultural resource areas. And what they're doing with that, they're signaling that no land within the greenbelt or within agricultural resource areas is permanently protected. So they've not only opened the door to speculators and developers, they've incentivized them to buy up farmland that is right now listed as protected, because of course it may change at any moment in time. And so what that does is effectively increases the likelihood that the next generation of farmers will not be able to afford their own land, because of course this land is now off the market or going for prices that is just completely unreasonable for new and young farmers. And I guess the last thing I'd say, area of concern is this potential loss of agricultural impact assessments, maybe, and the unknown impacts on agricultural and natural systems by merging the provincial policy statement and the growth plan. Maybe, we think. We don't know what's happening under any of these, but the threat is there. And having seen what's happened with everything else over the last 6 months, I don't see reasons for optimism.
Well, I only laugh because that's my uncomfortable response to like terrible news. I'm not laughing because it's funny. That's my unfortunate coping mechanism where people go, you should be more serious about it. I'm like, trust me, I am feeling serious inside, but I laugh on the outside going, I don't know what to do with this information because it is disheartening for sure. And I think in a time of growing climate crisis and recognizing about how agricultural lands that we depend on south of the border may not be providing as much as they should. I mean, it really does start this cascading effect about our food security going to the future. So thank you for that. Susan, you ended last time. So how about you go in the middle this time?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Margaret. I guess my top concerns are, framed around the context of Aboriginal rights. So what I'm concerned about is the diminishment of the role of the Crown in the environment without proper consultation. So what we're seeing is a diminishment of environmental law and policy, a reduction in the role of the Crown as it relates to environmental conservation and protection. Conservation authorities and changes to the Conservation Authorities Act are a great example. And this has been done without consultation with treaty partners. So that's breaking the law. That bothers me because we know better now. There's been a lot of change in the past decade, and we know that consultation, duty to consult, and accommodate is law. It's at the highest law of Canada. So why does the province of Ontario as the Crown think that they're not obligated to follow these rules? So I'm concerned about what that means for all of us representing as constituents and as representing the Crown. So that's a big concern for me. It's not the direction I thought we'd be heading in my lifetime, that's for sure. And I guess I look to Blueberry First Nation, which just run a precedent-setting case on cumulative effects. And cumulative effects concern me, especially in this particular very unique part of the Great Lakes system that we're in, where the agricultural land is so fertile, really before we hit the shield. And we're seeing so much growth in the country in the past 30, 40 years. I'm concerned that the patterns of growth that we've seen happen that have been largely unsustainable are really going to continue to dictate the patterns of growth in the future. And I think in the changing of the role of the Crown in the Planning Act and Conservation Authorities Act, et cetera, that we've seen in recent months really is just perpetuating the bad mistakes of the past when we know we have to consult and we have to do better. And just to pull back the idea of cumulative effects on Blueberry First Nation, that was a very interesting case in law in Canada, because they were able to show a constraints map effectively demonstrating the loss of their jurisdiction to exercise their rights on the land as a result of pollution and impacts from mining over time. And, what if First Nations and treaty partners were to do the same, to show the loss of their ability to exercise their culturally protected rights in the Constitution in the Great Lakes Basin? There was a somewhat famous article written by Paul General of Six Nations, and it was titled, "I'm not hunting on your farmland, you're farming on my hunting territory." And I think we just need to try to find a way to support, as treaty partners, meaningful consultation and the expression of these rights, because they uphold the 7 generations.
Yeah.
So
thank you for that. And I think too, as the Crown recedes its duty, what we're starting to see, at least within our region, is there are municipal projects that are now uncertain because of First Nation appeals. So it doesn't actually help move things faster or make it in a positive collaborative way. It actually starts to get things much more uncertain, and we know how much development and planning for development needs a degree of certainty. So it is a cost and a time saving and just the right thing to do for sure. Okay, Anne, what do you see as a concern or top concerns about the protection of natural heritage or farmland, or both?
Sure. Well, I'm not sure there's a whole lot to add. I mean, I agree with everyone that a chief concern is just the rate at which farmland and natural heritage are disappearing. It's really quite shocking. And those of us who've lived long enough have seen it. We've seen it everywhere. I grew up in Stratford, Southern Ontario, and I tell you, that drive between Stratford and Toronto, it's completely transformed in my lifetime. Anyway, I'm just going to focus for a second on wetlands as an example of what's happening. So since European settlement, about 72% of wetlands in Ontario have disappeared due to development. And that's despite the laws and policies that are in place to protect them. And now, exactly as Phil and Susan have underlined, even those laws and policies that are supposed to protect them are being unraveled. And it's really, I mean, I think we're all in shock. And I kind of share your response, Margaret. We either laugh or we cry, and there's a lot to cry about here. It's really quite something. When you think of the benefits of wetlands, and I'm going to go back to this economic assessment again. According to this economic assessment, wetlands in Southern Ontario provide over $51 billion of benefits every year. So that's, all kinds of benefits like, carbon storage and flooding control and habitat for wildlife and land for exercising Indigenous rights for any people who want to harvest wild foods or medicines, for people who recreate and so on. All of these benefits are disappearing before our eyes. So, we have to ask ourselves, why are we so willing to let this happen? Why is the government so willing to let this happen? And I'm just going to point out for people that I think Ian will put in the chat the link to that particular economic study in case anybody's interested. Thanks.
Thank you. And I think that we keep being told it's housing, and I think there's enough evidence even from the province's own housing affordability task force that shows that land isn't the issue, right? More land isn't the issue, and it's a finite resource. It's something that we can't create. You rip up farmland, you're not just going to replace that easily. So thank you for that. And I think too, as Susan had mentioned about the crown receding, it puts a lot more pressure on what I consider the workhorse of governments, which is municipalities. In my personal opinion, I feel that they're underfunded, under-resourced, understaffed, not because they choose to be, but because that's kind of how the downloading process, what situation it has put them in. And especially under new legislation, it's going to put a lot more pressure on municipalities to solve some of these answers. And I don't know if they all have the tools, as far as legislatively have the tools and controls that they should. But I want to think about solutions versus just all the things that they can't do. So for all my municipal councillors on there, I just want you to know I truly respect the work that you do. And it is a hard slog. Talking to many municipal councillor friends myself, it is a hard slog. So let's pivot a little bit about municipal government and the role that municipalities can play in being strong stewards. Now, I know, Susan, you have a real affinity for zoning. I don't know if this is where you want to talk about it or you want to talk about it later on, but what role do you think that they can play in this conversation?
Yeah, well, I can talk about zoning both times, Margaret. I would say be an ally, step up to the plate and get to know your treaty partner, and think about the greatest power that you have as a municipality, which is your power of zoning. Official plans are policies, but the zoning is the form of law that you have control over that touches and concerns the land most directly. And we know in the blueprint for action that the Association of Municipalities of Ontario produced, in February of last year, there was recommendation number 6 that says ensure your zoning bylaws are up to date with official plans and reflect best practices for development that respects local decision making while prioritizing housing and local needs. And we also know that section 16 subsection 20 of the Planning Act requires that your zoning is in conformity within a year to your official plan. And that's super hard for municipalities to do. I get that, like that's a bit unrealistic, but I just want as a solution for you to think about the power of zoning. Because if we take the example of these 7,400 acres that are being removed from the green belt, and really the municipality certainly is the creature of the province in this instance. They're being told what to do. You're going to take this out. You're going to make this happen. Well, think about a creative way that you can zone those areas prior to having to remove them from the designations of the policy designations that they have. So there could be a creative way that you could almost approach it like a site plan and provide environmental protections for the features that are on the site. So that's a solution, I think, that is one that's often overlooked, how prescriptive zoning can be. We can take a look at the Oak Ridges Marine conservation plans implementing zoning bylaws as a good example of when the province was moving in the right direction. And as a template that you can look to follow for protecting areas that really should be protected and not open for development.
Absolutely. Thank you, Susan. And Anne, I know you work really closely with municipalities on some of these things. And so what role have you seen or do you see municipalities playing regarding natural heritage protection?
Thanks, Margaret. Well, 3 points to make here. First of all, echoing what Susan has said about zoning and pointing out that it's also the policies and the management plans that are put in place to conserve the natural world that you need to be paying attention to. Municipalities really do have a critical role to play in this. And so strengthening your management plans, your policies, your zoning bylaws, all of this will help to improve chances that land is conserved. Beyond this, I think it's really time, like the timing is perfect for municipalities to signal their commitment to these things. And part of that is because of what's going on. I mean, your constituents are pretty concerned and they're hearing about what's happening. Obviously, the Greenbelt has kind of stolen the limelight here, but there are people that I never expected before to participate in demonstrations who are doing so and telling me very proudly about that. So it's the time really to be showing the leadership and to be talking about your commitment. And that's especially true, I think, because we've just gone through COP15 in Montreal. And they came up with a biodiversity framework with a bunch of targets that governments around the world are committed to, including Canada. And I think we need at the municipal level to express support for those targets. One of those targets is called 30 by 30, and that's all about protecting 30% of your lands and waters by 2030. Anyway, I think what I'm not suggesting is that every municipality should be protecting 30% of its lands and waters. Though that would be nice, it's simply not realistic. But I think what municipalities can do is, first of all, express support for that target, and then find ways that you can contribute. And that's this work that Margaret has kind of referred to. Ontario Nature now for a couple of years has been working with municipalities to assess their conservation lands and see whether they can contribute to that federal target. And they can and they do. There have been numerous examples. For example, London, Kitchener, Toronto, Ajax, Northumberland County, and Lambton County have all had lands, their own municipal lands, added towards that federal target. They haven't protected 30% of their lands and waters. That's not the expectation. But what they can do is, with the lands that they do have, they can have them assessed and have them contribute. And in some cases, for municipalities, right now, those lands might not be protected at a standard that would meet that federal target. But then again, there's an opportunity to look at the best practice examples that we do have and to improve your policies, your zoning bylaws, your management plans, so that you do actually meet that federal standard. If you would like to know more about this, Ontario Nature is hosting a workshop next week, February 22nd at 2 p.m. It's geared specifically to municipal staff and decision makers, but during that workshop, we'll go into detail about what municipalities have done and what municipalities can do in order to contribute to that bigger biodiversity target. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Anne. And Phil, you work closely in your local community as well, and as part of Sustain Ontario, you have this lens. What role do you see municipalities playing?
Well, I'm glad that Anne started off speaking about the importance of the role of demonstration. It's how I've phrased it. I think there are three important things that municipalities can do: vigilance, transparency, and demonstration. And when I'm talking demonstration, I mean, municipal councillors must publicly demonstrate unqualified support for the permanent preservation of protected prime agricultural land at a minimum, and then find or lead the charge to establish this as the consensus, the accepted position of council. And of course, I mean, use every tool at your disposal. We're going to hear about those coming up soon, but use every tool, set up real protections at a municipal level that complement those available at a provincial level, use them all. But more important than that is to remain vigilant and well prepared to counter and challenge the inevitable response from land speculators and investors and developers. When there's that much money involved, effective land preservation tools are under attack the minute they're released publicly.
Yeah.
So while municipalities can undoubtedly play a leading role in developing and implementing new strategies for farmland preservation, I think the most important role is in demonstrating and collaborating with other municipalities, with international leaders, to not only access leading edge strategies, but also develop the discourse of systems and stewardships and sustainability and balance within the municipality.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Phil. And I do think that's a role sometimes that municipalities get sometimes stuck in the policy world and forget that there is a constituency that's looking to them for leadership on these things. And to echo what Anne said, the constituency is looking for that leadership and is ready to support their municipality in ensuring that their local public spaces and green spaces and farmland are well protected. So I think now is the time. So we have time for one more panel question, and we were going to talk about Bill 23 and all kinds of things, and maybe we'll leave that for the Q&A after. I want to make sure that we have enough time to cover kind of some of the solutions. So I'm going to, just for panelists, we're going to kind of pivot to that. As a reminder to the attendees, if you have a specific question that you would like to ask, because after this question, it'll be your turn to have your say and ask the panelists what you would like to ask them. So please make sure that you put it into the chat. I don't know if we have the Q&A. Yeah, it's just in the chat, or when we get to the Q&A session, I think Ian will be able to raise hands and we can do that sort of thing afterwards. So think about some information you need or want that maybe we haven't covered yet. So this will be our last panel one. And then I shut up for a little bit. Okay, so let's think about those solutions. Let's think about 3 best practices. Let's give some municipal councillors or community members some tools of an idea, something you saw implemented, a policy that you think really works, that helps further the goal of preserving agricultural systems and supporting agricultural systems and preserving and supporting natural heritage systems. Now, I think, Phil, you're the only one that hasn't gone first, I think. Maybe my mind is off and my memory is failing at best, but I'm going to start with you anyways, Phil, if you don't mind.
Awesome, no problem. And you're limiting me to 3. So I'm going to try and be concise here and talk about 3 in specific. It's funny, I've spent quite a while down in the Guelph area and went to a number of the Ontario Farmland Trust annual meetings, and they have some amazing topics and ideas for farmland preservation have been sort of aired from international speakers over the years. And I'd have to say, I think all three of these came from those conversations. And as it turns out, the examples I have for all three are American, but trust me, these have been used elsewhere as well. So I just want to quickly mention Farmland Preservation Zoning District. So this one requires some compatible legislation at a state level, but certainly establishing a farmland preservation zoning district to maintain productive agricultural lands by limiting the encroachment of non-agricultural development was applied in Wisconsin. And the landowners can qualify for tax credits in accordance with the state's farmland preservation law. So that's it requires some, like I say, compatible legislation, but it's certainly one approach. Another approach is to sort of use a stick rather than a carrot. So this is an agricultural land mitigation ordinance. So it asks developers to offset the impacts of developing farmland by purchasing easements to permanently protect an equivalent or greater amount of farmland than they develop when that happens. And that happens far too often. And the third one is something that's an idea that's been around for quite a long time in the US and been used very effectively in some cases. It's basically purchasing agricultural conservation easements, what they call it, basically purchasing the development rights, they call it down there quite often, although this acronym PACE, purchase of agricultural conservation easements, has sort of been what they are using lately, where the landowner voluntarily sells an agricultural conservation easement to a public entity, or in some cases to a community land trust, and that prevents the land from being converted to other uses. Now, after they sell the easement, they keep the rights of ownership. That's the right to farm the land, prevent trespass, sell or bequeath the land. It's just the conservation easement remains on, and they've sold the rights to that conservation easement, if you will, to a public entity, which is one layer more on top of what one might do with a typical conservation easement. And we can talk about that more later.
Perfect. Thank you, Phil. So let's see. Susan, do you want to talk about zoning first or later? There was some
I'll come
people
back to
saying-
zoning. We're hearing it a lot, aren't we? I would just advise you to create a zoning program for the municipal staff here. Just get in touch with your treaty partner and together co-create a zoning program and explore the idea of Aboriginal zoning. Like, what does that look like? And how can that be enacted as it relates to, ensuring there's space for the exercising of traditional rights? Is there a medicine zone? Is there, and that will give a strength at the highest law in the land to the zoning bylaw that you're creating. So, it will be unique in the country, and it will be something that will have irrefutable strength as it relates to whatever game the Crown might be playing from one day to the next. We have examples in the Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan, which is kind of the gold standard, because unlike the Places to Grow or the Greenbelt Plan, they mandated the implementing zoning in the Act. So if we take a look at what the Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan implementing zoning bylaws did, is they had minimum vegetative protection zones around natural heritage and hydrologic, key natural heritage and hydrologic features of 30 meters, right, give or take. So that could be something that you could just replicate in a zoning program that could be done alongside your treaty partner. So I only have one of the three recommendations.
We're behind on time anyways. We're behind
Okay.
schedule, so it's fine if you just have one. Thank you for that. Anne, I'll let you finish this question off if you have any best practices to share.
Sure. Well, I'm going to echo what Susan's been saying all along, and that is municipalities need to reach out to local Indigenous communities. build relationships, understand their interests, learn from them, support them, respect their rights. All of these things need to happen. And I think if they're done, then we are going to see improvements for sure. Indigenous-led conservation efforts offer some of the most promising opportunities out there to protect nature. And so it's time to figure out how you can support them. Second, I think municipalities have to figure out, and this echoes what I said earlier, but you have to figure out how to build public support and understanding for these things. I don't know exactly what municipalities do, but messaging on your websites and your social media and local media, on your council agendas, etc. Just get the word out and make sure that you're building understanding among your constituents. It was interesting during the COP15 in Montreal that the Montreal metropolitan community, representing about 80 different municipalities, made a statement about supporting the 30 by 30 target that I'd referred to earlier. And that statement got a lot of press. Mind you, it was mostly in the French press, but a little bit in the English press too. But it just goes to show how when a municipality makes a statement and makes an effort to get that statement out there, it can be done. And finally, I'd like to just put in a plug for building relationships with local community groups. There are potential allies out there, and they'll be keen to work with you and stand up for good policies to protect farmland and nature. Some of them, like the local naturalist clubs, have an incredible amount of knowledge that they'll be willing to share, knowledge and passion. And I think if you were able to tap into the knowledge and passion of local community groups, that can take you a long way. Ontario Nature, we're a federation of over 155 such municipal organizations, such community-based organizations. And Ian, I think, will put a link in the chat to the Nature Network, just so you can see how across the province there are these community groups, and many of them would be willing to step up and provide support and engage in partnerships with municipalities. Thanks.
Thank you. And of course, I echo the work with your community groups. We are usually under-resourced, so we can't. I saw a comment about you need to meet with us, and yes, we agree. In my area, there's 18 municipalities, so it's a lot of people to potentially meet with. But thank you, panel. I'm going to turn it over to Ian here in a second, and we'll go till about 5 o'clock with audience questions. And then afterwards, I'm going to be hosting a casual after space. So if anybody wants to discuss, I don't know if any of our panelists will be able to stay on, but if anybody wants to discuss anything further, then I'll be hosting that for 15 minutes afterwards. But Ian, I will pass it on to you.
Yeah, thanks, Margaret. So I've been tracking some questions and conversations in the chat. As we said, we're going to go until 5, so I'll just be tracking the questions here. And the first question I have is from Jeanette, and this one was specifically directed at Phil, and I think it's quite interesting. Do you see OFDUs as helpful or not to keeping farmland as farmland, or would you call it a double-edged sword?
That is an interesting question. It's taking a second to digest there. I think what on-farm development allows is the potential for more diversity in farming. And so in that, I would say sort of more resilient farms better able to sort of withstand market shocks and, potential shocks from weird growing seasons we've been having and unpredictable growing seasons we've been having lately, certainly in Eastern Ontario, although I hear the same is true down in Southern Ontario. I would say it has the opportunity to offer that. I would also say, though, that most farmers that I know are already maxed out in efforts and resources and available cash. So the opening up the possibility of spending more money and investing more and spending more time to create alternative products is, hey, it's something we're doing on our farm here. So I wouldn't criticize it, but I wouldn't necessarily see it as a panacea either. Not for
And
everyone.
then, and then as well, just for anyone in the chat or in the attendance who doesn't know, OFDU is on-farm diverse use. Or am I correct, Phil?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought I knew what it meant. Next question I have is from Priya, and she asked, what are some specific examples of effective policies municipalities can implement to support farm business operations and preserve farmland operations? So we've touched a little bit on this now, but I think Priya is looking for some more specific examples, maybe from different municipalities that any of you would know. I just put Phil on the spot for this question, but I think Phil probably is the one to answer this one, but I'll just double check with Anne and Susan first to see if there's any examples that come to mind to answer that question.
I have to defer to Phil on this, sorry.
I might jump in and just say, buffer zones, there's often things around lighting and spraying and to protect like farm operations and nuisance for residents that abut the farm use. So usually creating a buffer zone is a good first step from what I know, but I'll pass it over to you, Phil.
I'm just rereading Priya's question. I mean, I think it's more a general policies to support and preserve. I mean, we've talked a bit about some of the pieces that have been used elsewhere to support and preserve farmland preservation. I mean, it really comes down, I would say, like some of the biggest tools for at a municipal level, other than the very specific tools we're talking about, specific types of zoning, etc., is really, I go back again to vigilance and transparency. Like these roles that municipal councilors and staff and city staff play in the whole planning process. And I mean, it's an entire ongoing planning process against constant onslaught. It's it's a role that I don't necessarily I wouldn't want myself, but it's without a doubt an indispensable role in constantly buffering against what is an ongoing onslaught.
Thank you, Phil. And then I have a question from Jennifer. She says, I'm brand new and sit on one of our local conservation authority boards, and I'm also a counselor. I feel like this relationship could likely also be leveraged more. I'm curious if there's others here or on the panel in this case, as I'm proposing it to you guys, who potentially are aware of any council and conservation authorities that use those positions to advocate for further protection. And Anne, I'll put you on the spot first for this one, if that's okay, and then we'll go to Susan next, and then Phil.
Yeah, so yes, I would say most municipalities, especially in Southern Ontario, but probably across the province where there is a conservation authority, that has been a very tight relationship. And the very sad news is that Bill 23 has totally changed the rules and is totally undermining that relationship. And it is very, very concerning. I'll just give you a few examples of what's happened, because it used to be, well, has been up until now, that conservation authorities, they provide the expertise. They provide that watershed perspective for municipalities. They do the monitoring, the watershed monitoring, the ecological monitoring. They bring that to municipalities so that it can be used in decision making. They've been involved in permitting so that when it comes to decisions around development in floodplains and so on, they've been there backing up many municipalities that want to try to conserve and protect through their permitting role. But we've seen that really taken away from them through Bill 23. Because of Bill 23, conservation authorities can no longer be involved in permitting of development projects approved under the Planning Act. So they've been removed from that role. They no longer have the authority to consider pollution or conservation lands in their permitting. So that's been pulled away from them. They no longer can enter into agreements with municipalities about the review of planning proposals and applications. It's really shocking to see how the role of conservation authorities has been diminished and what that impact it's going to have on municipalities. Because what I understand from people that I've been talking to is there's huge concern out there about what that means for municipalities in terms of resources, in terms of liability, in terms of their ability to respond with expertise to development applications. It's been completely undermined because this role, this relationship with conservation authorities has been undermined.
I'm just going to jump in here and make a plug for the Shared Path Consultation Initiative. I'm a member of the board, and we're going to be hosting a series of workshops with municipalities, conservation authorities, and First Nations over the course of 2023. And if you're interested, reach out to the Shared Path to see if you would like to participate as a representative of a municipality alongside your treaty partner and your conservation authority. Everything that Anna said is right. You know, this is what I mean when I refer to the diminishment of the role of the Crown in the environment without consultation. And so, you know, the conservation authorities are going to be shrinking, certainly. And it's happened before. It happened in the 90s, early 90s, and it's happening again. But, you know, there's an opportunity for change here. And I would just recommend, as Anne said, the relationship's always been very close because, you know, regional municipal elected officials would form the board of conservation authorities, which is actually a change that Mike Harris brought in the 90s. And so, you know, as a representative of the board, you know, you have to get to know staff, and building those relationships will be super important. But municipalities can also, you know, form an agreement to hire conservation authority staff, just by way of an example, to get out there and do some of the prescriptive zoning as part of the zoning program that I've referenced. Because a lot of the time they don't have the flora and fauna ecologists or biologists on staff at the municipality. That's where the CA came in and played a big role in helping to support the enforcement and upholding of official plan policies as it related to natural heritage system planning, right? So, you know, but those staff they're still there now. So, you know, think about what you can do now with the powers that you have to work with those staff in other ways. And the workshop will be posted soon. I saw Jennifer, you put a link there asking for a link on that. We don't have it ready yet. We're just solidifying the funding agreement right now to make that come together. But check out our website, get on the mailing list for the Shared Path, sharedpath.ca, and we'll make sure that you're informed if you're interested in participating in that relationship forming process.
Can I just jump back in for 1 second because I forgot to mention it? If you'd like to understand what's happened with the changes of Bill 23 and the relationship between conservation authorities and municipalities, I would highly recommend that you read the submission of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario on Bill 23, because they go into that topic. So I think Ian has the link and he can put that in the chat, but it's a really important read. I was really pleased when I read their submission to see how aligned we were in our perspectives about the problems that were being created. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. Phil, did you have anything that you wanted to speak to on that?
They more than adequately covered everything. Thanks.
I agree. And I just on the conservation authority relationship to the municipalities, just as an anecdote here in Hamilton, the conservation authorities were extremely important, which was why some of our more development friendly councillors tried to really make sure that they were on our local conservation authority. And until very recently, we're trying to push for some interesting proposals like moving wetlands and the like. So, I mean, it goes both ways, right? Where it is extremely important relationship, and the folks who are maybe not as aligned with the folks on this call certainly recognize that previously as well. We're more or less run out of questions. There's a number of very interesting questions that remain. One very interesting question that almost seems like a cap and trade style program that existed in New England with regards to developers and development, but I don't know if anyone on the call will know about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to thank you three for answering these questions, and I'm just going to invite Franz back to wrap us up before we hand over the room to Margaret for that social afterwards.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Susan, for a very informative hour. And thanks to all of our participants for your comments and questions. We'll be making this recording available in the coming days. I'll send a video link to everyone who has registered. We're about to wrap up, but first we have one poll question to help us find out what you thought of this event. Ian, if you could just put up that poll, please.
The poll is now live. And as before, I'll let folks know when we start approaching the endpoint, but everyone's filling it out very quickly. Thank you so much, everyone. And it's slowed down a little bit, so I'm going to end it up here. Thank you so much, everyone, and I'll share the results. It looks like most of you found this helpful. And back to you, Franz.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for the feedback. And if you do have any additional comments, you can reach me at info@livableontario.ca. I'm hoping Ian can just throw this into the chat so that you have it. Before we conclude, let me just say a few brief words about the Municipal Leaders for Stronger Communities and this series. Our hope is that these webinars will build a sense of community that will help municipal leaders be more effective. Our next webinar is planned for late March, and it will cover an issue that I know is top of mind to all of you, housing, so stay tuned. Finally, a big thanks to EcoSpark for partnering with us, and once again, a big thanks to Margaret Prophet, Ann Bell, Phil Mount, Susan Robertson, for a great panel discussion, and thanks, Ian, for helping with Zoom. And a big thanks to all of you for joining us today as we build stronger communities. With that, I will hit the record button and stop